Hey everyone! This is a quick reminder to subscribe and hit that like button. It lets me know that you are enjoying my content. Also, feel free to drop your suggestions for future stories in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and let's dive right in. I hate holidays. All of them. Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, the 4th of July, you name it. Every single one turns normal people into absolute lunatics. And working at Walmart? It's like being stuck in a never-ending horror movie, but instead of ghosts or demons, it's moms fighting over the last can of cranberry sauce. I've seen it all. Customers shoving entire towers of products into their carts, dads wrestling over the last pumpkin pie, old ladies sprinting to the register like their lives depended on it. It's a war zone. And the worst of it? The days between Christmas and New Year's. Non-stop insanity. I had just managed to escape to the break room, finally free from the madness for my lunch break. I could still hear the faint chaos outside, muffled announcements, distant yelling, the occasional sound of something crashing to the floor. My head was pounding. I pulled out my phone, ready to scroll mindlessly for 20 minutes, anything to detach myself from the nightmare of holiday shoppers. Then my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was just another store group chat or maybe a sale notification. But when I looked at the screen, my stomach twisted. Emergency alert, do not buy the eggs. I blinked, then read it again and again. The hell? I stared at it for a good minute, trying to process what I was looking at. Of all the things to send a nationwide emergency broadcast about, eggs? I let out a short laugh, rubbing my eyes. Maybe I was just exhausted. Maybe someone hacked the system for a prank. It wouldn't be the first time. The door swung open and Tom walked in, his eyes locked on his own phone. He had the same expression I probably did. Confusion, amusement, a bit of irritation. "Hey Alison, did you get this?" he asked, holding up his phone. "Yeah," I sighed, tossing mine on the table. "I don't think it's real. It's about the damn eggs, Tom." He actually laughed. A real, genuine laugh, like this was the funniest thing he'd seen all day. I know, so lame. If someone hacked the system, this is what they went with? I shook my head, smirking. Guess the government's running out of disasters to warn us about. Before he could respond, a piercing scream shattered the moment. A deep, full-lunged shriek, the kind that makes your stomach drop. Both of us snapped our heads toward the door. Tom and I bolted into the main hall. Right outside the staff room, a woman was standing, her hands clamped over her ears, her whole body shaking. Her shopping cart was tipped over, and egg cartons spilled across the floor. Several eggs had cracked open, their yolks pooling on the tiles. Tom ran up to her first, his voice urgent, but calm. "Ma'am, are you all right? What happened?" The woman was sobbing now, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. She pointed at the eggs, her fingers trembling. Her voice was barely more than a choked whisper. "It cracked open and ran away." A chill ran up my spine. A few shoppers gathered nearby, murmuring in confusion. Some just shook their heads and walked away, assuming the woman was crazy or overreacting. Tom shot me a look, his brow furrowed, his unspoken question clear. "Should I take her to the staff room?" I nodded. He gently took the woman's arm, guiding her toward the door. I stayed behind, my eyes locked on the carton of broken eggs. The crowd dispersed, people losing interest now that the show was over. For a moment, it was just me and the eggs. I knelt down, carefully lifting the carton. Most of the eggs were cracked open, yolk leaking out onto the floor. But one of them was oozing something else. Not the usual clear, sticky goo. This was thick, black, like ink. I stared at it, frozen. The dark liquid dripped onto my fingers, slow and unnatural. I needed to throw this away, immediately. I stood up, gripping the carton, ready to toss it into the nearest bin. Then, another scream. This time from the baking aisle. I dropped the carton and ran. I sprinted toward the baking aisle, my shoes slipping slightly against the tile as I turned the corner. The second I got there, I saw it. Shoppers running in the opposite direction, some abandoning their carts entirely. A woman had been screaming, but she was gone now, vanished into the chaos. I stopped, breathing heavily, scanning the aisle. Egg cartons. Scattered across the floor, dozens of them, some crushed, some open, and in almost every single one, the eggs were broken. And leaking, that same black liquid. It pooled in thick, oily puddles, seeping into the cracks between the tiles. I took a slow step forward, my pulse hammering in my ears. The air smelled wrong, like rotten milk mixed with something metallic. Then, a third scream. It came from the other side of the store. Then another, closer, and another. More people were screaming now, all over the place. I turned my head just in time to see a man drop a stack of canned goods and bolt toward the exit. Someone else shoved past him, knocking over a display stand in their rush to flee. I barely had a second to process it before. Boom! A whole shelf collapsed behind me. Bags of flour exploded into the air, filling the aisle with a thick white cloud of dust. I stumbled backward, coughing, my eyes burning from the sudden haze. That was too close. If I had been standing there just seconds earlier, I would have been crushed. Something was happening, something bad. Then I heard it. Not the screaming, not the crashing shelves. Something else. A faint clicking sound. Tiny, sharp, fast. The noise echoed against the tile like claws tapping against the floor, and it was getting closer. I turned toward the front of the store, and that's when I saw them. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. My mind screamed rats, but they were wrong. Fleshy, almost raw-looking. They had tiny, shrunken bodies, but their claws were massive, almost too large for their frames. Their teeth jutted out of their jaws, sharp and jagged, and their eyes, completely black, soulless. And worst of all, they were fast. I wasn't the only one who saw them. The crowd at the front of the store finally turned and noticed what was chasing them, and that's when everything collapsed into chaos. The horde of creatures rushed forward, scattering across the store like a flood. People screamed. Some were trampled in the rush toward the doors, their bodies lost beneath the panicked mass. Others weren't fast enough. I saw a man go down. One of the creatures jumped onto his back, sinking its claws into his flesh. He tried to fight it off, but another latched onto his leg, sinking its teeth in. He screamed, loud, desperate, before he was dragged down. I didn't see what happened next. I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could, dodging overturned carts and abandoned baskets, my heart slamming against my ribs. The clicking sounds behind me were getting louder, faster. I didn't dare look back. The staff room. That was my only chance. I turned the last corner, nearly slipping on a spilled drink, and saw Tom standing just outside the break room door. The woman from earlier was with him, her face pale and drawn. His eyes landed on me, then shifted past me. His face changed. His usual blank expression twisted into something I had never seen before, pure panic. They saw them. They saw what was chasing me. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Tom barely had time to react before I barreled through the doorway, diving inside the staff room. He slammed the door shut just as something slammed into the other side. The entire door shook. For a second, everything was still. Then, crack. Teeth. Long, jagged teeth pierced through the door, sinking into the wood like it was butter. Tom stumbled backward. The woman let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. I was still on the floor, my arms trembling, my breath coming out in ragged gasps. The teeth disappeared, yanked back through the hole they had made. For a second, nothing happened. Then, silence. They had fallen back. I pushed myself up, my entire body shaking, and turned toward the woman. She was staring at the door, her hands trembling so hard they looked blurred. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Those came from the eggs I was holding. I swallowed hard. My mouth tasted like copper. She wasn't lying. I turned toward the small window in the door, pressing myself against it to see the store beyond. It looked like a war zone. Shelves had collapsed, products were scattered everywhere. There were bodies on the floor. Some were still, some were missing pieces. And then, under one of the fallen shelves, an arm. Just an arm. The sleeve was soaked in blood. But the worst part? The arm was picked clean. I barely had time to react before my stomach flipped. I turned away and vomited, my entire body shuddering as I collapsed against the door. Tom groaned. "Alison, damn, we're stuck in here and you do this?" I wiped my mouth, still gagging, and shot him a glare. "At least it wasn't on you." He gave a nervous chuckle but didn't argue. Then, cautiously, he stepped forward and peered through the tiny window himself. He took one look at the arm and the blood pool and immediately turned pale. His throat worked like he was swallowing something back. Finally, he stepped away and whispered, We have to get out of here." I nodded. We both turned back to the window just as they appeared. A horde of them. They moved in perfect unison, their tiny claws clicking against the tile in synchronized taps. It wasn't random movement. They weren't scrambling like rats. They were searching. And then they stopped, right by the fallen shelf with the arm, and suddenly, they broke formation. Like a switch flipped in their minds, they lunged forward, jumping over each other, even tearing at each other, fighting for the scraps. Then, just as suddenly, they froze. Like another switch had flipped. In one perfect motion, they stood back up, their movements eerily in sync again. And they kept running. Then we saw it. At the end of the pack, one was limping. It staggered, struggling to keep up. Then, boom, the thing exploded. Its insides flew everywhere, splatters of black gunk covering the tile. Tom turned toward me and the woman, his voice low and urgent. "We cannot stay here. We need to get out, or we're next." I knew he was right. I just wasn't sure if getting out was even possible anymore. I took a shaky breath, forcing my brain to work past the panic. Tom was right. We couldn't stay here. The staff room was a dead end, no way out except back into the store, where those things were still hunting. I glanced around the room, searching for anything we could use. A broom, a mop, a small knife sitting on the counter next to the microwave. Not much, but better than nothing. Tom grabbed the knife, flipping it in his hand like he actually knew what he was doing. The woman took the mop, holding it like it was a sword that could actually do something against those things. I grabbed the broomstick, gripping it tight. "This is stupid," I muttered, testing the weight of it. "But I guess running out there empty-handed is even worse." Tom slowly reached for the door handle. I felt my heart hammer against my ribs as he cracked it open, just a sliver. Silence. He pushed it open a little more. The store was still a wreck. Shelves overturned, aisles destroyed, blood smeared across the floor. But the creatures were gone, or at least, they weren't here right now. We moved quickly, keeping low, creeping through the aisles like we were in some horror movie where the second you make a sound, you're dead. My breath felt too loud, my footsteps sounded deafening. Then, clicking sounds. All three of us froze. They were coming. Tom grabbed my arm and pulled me into the nearest aisle. We pressed ourselves against the shelves, waiting. A moment later, they passed. A wave of them, their claws clicking against the tile in perfect sync, moving like a hunting pack. They didn't see us. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. They were running in circles. Not random, not chaotic. It was organized. Every few minutes sweep the store, following the same pattern. Tom looked at me, realization flickering in his eyes. "We can use this," he whispered. "If they're running in circles, we can time it, move when they pass." I nodded. It was risky, but it was the best shot we had. We waited. 1 round, 2 rounds. We memorized their pattern, and then we moved, ducking, running, switching aisles at the perfect time. Each time we heard the clicking approaching, we pressed against the shelves, waiting. It was working. We were so close to the exit, just a few more turns. Then, disaster. The woman's mop handle knocked over a pickle jar. Glass shattered. The sound was deafening. And just like that, the clicking stopped. My stomach dropped. A split second later, the clicking resumed. But this time, it was coming straight for us. Tom's eyes went wide. "Run." We took off, but they were too fast. The creatures were on us in seconds. One leaped onto the woman, sinking its teeth into her arm. She screamed, trying to shake it off. I grabbed her wrist, pulling her forward. She ripped free, leaving a chunk of her own flesh behind. I didn't have time to process it, because then one of them jumped onto my back. Its teeth sank in, tearing a chunk out of me. I screamed, nearly collapsing from the pain. And then, Tom tripped. His foot caught on a can and he hit the floor hard. We barely had time to react before the horde swarmed him. They didn't even hesitate. 1 second, he was there. The next, he was covered in a writhing mass of black claws and teeth. I turned and ran, dragging the woman with me. I didn't look back. I couldn't, but just before I turned the corner, I saw his leg. Or at least what was left of it, just bones. The creatures had already stripped him clean. I nearly collapsed, but the exit was right there. I grabbed the woman, half dragging her toward the doors, and what I saw next made my blood run cold. The front of the store. Bones. Dozens of them. Some whole skeletons. Some just scattered remains. The people who had been here before us. What was left of them? We ran, jumping over bones, over blood, over the people who didn't make it. And then, the automatic doors. They were jammed. A skeleton was caught between them, the sensors freaking out. The doors kept trying to close, open, close, open. We shoved, pushed. The doors finally gave way. Sunlight hit my face. I didn't stop running until I was outside. Then I turned, gasping, my entire body trembling, and saw the creatures standing at the threshold, not moving. They didn't step outside. They just stared. Then one of them, maybe the dumbest one, lunged forward. Its body hit the sunlight, and it exploded. Black sludge and chunks of flesh splattered against the pavement. They wouldn't come out. They were afraid of the sun. The woman and I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. People were standing around, watching in shock. An ambulance, police, firefighters. Someone pulled me up, rushing me toward the medics. I barely felt it. I was numb. I heard someone talking. Maybe a medic. Maybe a cop. Then I heard a whisper. "They don't come out in the sun." I turned my head, barely listening. I sat on the cold pavement, my whole body trembling, my breathing ragged. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and in its place, a deep, sharp ache settled into my back. Everything felt distant, like I wasn't really there. The store behind me was a graveyard. Through the shattered glass doors, I could still see the destruction. Overturned carts, collapsed shelves, blood smeared across the floor. And them. The creatures stood just inside, hidden in the shadows, watching. They wouldn't come out. Not while the sun was still up. A medic knelt beside me, her gloved hands hovering just above my back. "We need to take a look at your injuries," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Can you sit up for me?" I tried, but the second I moved, pain exploded through my spine. I let out a strangled gasp, my vision blurring for a moment. The medic's eyes widened. She helped ease my shirt off, and the moment she saw my back, her breath hitched. I caught the way her face paled, the way her fingers trembled for just a second before she masked it with professionalism. She leaned in closer, whispering under her breath, "I've never seen injuries like this." Her voice was barely a murmur, but I still heard it. I clenched my jaw. I didn't want to know what my back looked like. Didn't want to know how badly torn up I really was. I was still conscious, though. That had to mean something, right? A shadow loomed over us. A police officer, tall, serious, his expression grim. "Miss," he said, his tone careful. "Is there anyone else still alive inside? Do we need to send in a rescue team?" I stared past him back at the store. At the creatures pacing inside. I thought of Tom, the last time I saw him, the way his leg, no, his bones, were the only thing left. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "If there was," I said slowly, voice hoarse, "they won't be for long." The officer's jaw tightened. He understood. A second medic came over, joining the first. They worked quietly, quickly, wrapping my wounds, pressing gauze over the worst of the bites. I didn't talk, neither did they. But as they worked, I caught snippets of a conversation nearby. Two officers. One of them was showing something on their phone. A video. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. A man's footsteps, running, a creature's clicking claws, chasing, and then a sharp pop. A sickening splat. One of the officers exhaled sharply. "They don't come out in the sun," he murmured. The second officer nodded. I saw a video of one chasing a guy. It hit the sunlight and just exploded. A pause, then, "So what happens when the sun goes down?" The other officer didn't answer. Didn't have to. The silence said everything. I closed my eyes, because I already knew, and I didn't think any of us were ready for what came next.